Last time on how to quarantine your fish, we went through the 3 deadly marine fish diseases and how to avoid them. We went through all the quarantine methods and concluded that prophylactic treatment using copper and chloroquine phosphate were the 2 best methods available. I also showed you the quarantine system that I'm running and hinted that I would walk you through the exact process. So now it's time to actually go through the flowcharts and walk you through this exact process and how to quarantine your fish. So let's get started. What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back. So it's the moment you all been waiting for. You've been wondering how this process works, so let's get started. Here we go. Okay, so first thing to cover here is some people here asked, what makes this quarantine setup? So let's walk you through the parts list right now. Okay, so here's the list here. The first thing we're going to want is a 20-gallon long or 29-gallon tank. The reason why we select the larger tank is because we want the greater area for the fish to swim around in, and we want the extra space so we can do a batch quarantine process, which means we're going to quarantine more than one fish at one time. The next piece of equipment we're going to want is a small power head, about 400 gallons per hour or so. And the reason why we want this is to generate circulation and oxygen exchange within the tank. The next piece of equipment we're going to want is an AquaClear power filter. Now the reason why we select an AquaClear power filter over a sponge filter is because we want the ability to have the flexibility to add different media to the tank. So we're going to add a foam insert in here, or a sponge in this case, and we're going to want to add carbon when we're done with the quarantine process to remove any medication when we're done. The next piece is the C-Chem ammonia badge. The C-Chem ammonia badge is what we're going to use to monitor toxic ammonia levels in the tank, because we know from the last video that if we put in medications, we know an API test kit is not going to work. So this is why we use that ammonia badge. We're going to need a basic heater, so any heater that you can get in the tank will work just fine. Anything from 50 watts to 100 watts will work just fine for this setup. We're going to want a cheap thermometer, something really cheap, almost throwaway, that you can get from Amazon. You can get some digital readouts. I can put the links up in the video so you can see what I'm talking about. They're pretty cheap and they work just as well as anything else. The next thing is we're going to want 2 to 3 inch PVC elbows. These PVC elbows are going to be used for hiding for our fish, so they're not completely stressed out in an empty tank. The last thing we're going to want is a cover. Whether this is a mesh cover or a glass cover, either or is fine. Just make sure you have something to prevent your fish from jumping, because you may quarantine some fish, such as wrasses, that may be prone to jumping out of your tank. Now that we've covered the parts list for a quarantine tank, now let's talk about the actual game plan and how we're actually going to quarantine our fish. So right here is the process. This is the chloroquine phosphate plus general cure QT process that I talked about in the last video, and here's the entire outline. This is a 32 to 35 day plan. Okay, so the first step we want to do before we get into all of this is we need to understand the salinity of the source where we're getting our fish. So whether that's your local fish store or your online fish store, wherever you get your fish, you're going to want to call them up, email them, and find out what their salinity is when those fish come to you, because you're going to want to have the same salinity in your quarantine tank that they have in their tanks. Our next step is to temperature acclimate the fish in the bag. Now, a lot of people are going to hear the suggestion and just kind of cringe, and I'm going to tell you right now, because we're going to dip the fish, we are not going to do a drip acclimation. So this is why the salinity match is really important when we're adding fish to the quarantine tank, so we don't have to go through a lot of adjustments. We're going to float this bag for 15 minutes, and then after 15 minutes we're going to get the fish out with a strainer, and then once the strainer is used, we will put the fish in the dip and start from there. The other reason why we do this is if you purchase your fish online, you cannot drip acclimate the fish. The reason why you cannot do that is because the fish has been shipped overnight. So any fish you get that has been shipped overnight runs the risk of ammonia poisoning once you open that bag. So you want to get the fish out of that bag as soon as possible. Okay, our next step is to dip the fish, and the dip that I prefer to use is Safety Stop. You can also use Ruby Rally Reef if you're not able to get that, or if you're not able to use a formalin-based dip, you can use another product called aquaflavin. Now, aquaflavin is a alternative to formalin. It's considered more safe and can do a similar job, but Safety Stop is typically what I use. So you're going to want to get some Safety Stop, and you're going to want to get two 2-gallon buckets, and you're going to want to set up your dip. The dip process is 30 minutes for each part if your fish is shipped overnight, or it will be 45 minutes if the fish is picked up locally. Another thing you're going to want to use is an air pump and an air stone for each of the parts. So you see that I have a air stone in the buckets where these fish are being dipped right now. Make sure during this process that you check on your fish every 5 to 10 minutes. Make sure there's not any signs of stress. The fish should generally be pretty chill in the water, but if you see rapid breathing or flashing or just any spazzing out, those may be signs of stress, and you may need to end the dip earlier than anticipated. Now that we're done with the dip process, we are going to move the fish into the quarantine tank either using a strainer or a colander. Once they're moved in, we're going to give them 48 hours to recover and eat. And from there we will begin the chloroquine phosphate dosing. So how do we dose chloroquine phosphate? Well, it's easier than you think. You're going to need a mini scale. You can get a mini scale like this at Amazon. I will go ahead and leave a link in the description so you can go ahead and pick one up. You're going to want to set the tear rating, which I've already done here. That's why you see those negative numbers. And you're going to want to open it up and insert the product holder here and make sure it reads 0 when you put it on the scale. You're going to want to get your chloroquine phosphate product. You're going to want to open up the package or the bottle. You're going to want to use a teaspoon measure, and you're going to want to slowly put in the product on the scale, and the concentration you're going to aim for is 40 milligrams per gallon. You can easily calculate this in an Excel document or a Google document. In this case, I'm measuring for this 29-gallon quarantine, and you can see how I'm slowly pouring it in and checking my measurements right now. Now in this example video I'm showing, I actually went a little bit higher on my concentration. That's just a personal preference that I do. I usually try to go around 45 milligrams per gallon, and I just do that because with chloroquine phosphate you have the ability to be a little bit flexible with the range. The therapeutic range is pretty wide. It can be anywhere from 40 milligrams to 80 milligrams, and you can increase the dosage depending on the severity of an active infection or if you just want to be extra safe. Next step up is actually mixing the chloroquine phosphate in water. So I usually take a cup, a little plastic cup. You can also use a specimen container if you're more comfortable with that. I go ahead and take my measuring instrument and put that product inside the cup, and then dip the actual measuring device itself and put it in the cup itself to make sure I get everything mixed up. Next thing I do is I get a baby spoon. You can get these at any grocery store, and I mix it up in the water to make sure everything's stirred nice and well. I'm using the quarantine water itself. I'm not using any RO water in this case. I just feel it's just easier to do because we're going to put that right into the quarantine tank when we're done. Okay, final step here. We're going to take that same cup and we're going to drop it into the display tank. We're going to dip that cup a couple times in the water, give it a nice shake to make sure we get all the chloroquine phosphate into the tank. And that's all we need to do. The great thing about chloroquine phosphate is that it's a one-time application, so we go ahead and do this once and we can sit back and relax because that's all we need to do. Make sure if you do any water changes that you replace the chloroquine phosphate, that you remove when you do those changes. Now that we're done dosing the chloroquine phosphate, we're going to keep in mind that we're going to have that chloroquine phosphate active in the tank for 30 days. This is what we call our 30-day quarantine period. Now that we've dosed chloroquine phosphate, we're going to give our fish 48 hours to acclimate to the chloroquine and to eat. And then once that's done, we're going to want to start medicating food. And the reason why we medicate food is because chloroquine phosphate treats all the external parasites that your fish may get shipped with. But we have to do medicated food to treat all the internal parasites and worms. Now the drug of choice we're going to use here is called API General Cure. Now what API General Cure is, it's a mix of two ingredients here, praziquantel and metronidazole. In order to mix General Cure with food, we're going to use a product called Focus. Now what Focus does is it binds the food to the medication, so we don't have to worry about the medication leaking into the water column. By binding food, we put less stress on the fish because we don't have multiple medications inside the water column that the fish has to deal with. This, in practice, actually makes a reef-safe medication, but I would still use carbon in your display tank if you happen to use this treatment in a display. Now let's talk about how to actually mix the medicated food. So first you're going to want some RODI water. Just go ahead and put some of that in to start the mix. Get some enriched vitamins or some type of appetite inducer, such as like a salcon or maybe even a garlic, and just go ahead and put that in. Now you're going to want to put in the General Cure mix. I use a measuring spoon that I got from a Seachem Metroblex kit. You just want to put in a half dose and just drop it in like so. Next up is the Focus mix, another equal parts dose. Go ahead and drop that into the mix. Now we're going to let this sit for about half an hour, and now the food will defrost and we can go ahead and mix everything up. And we can keep this mix for about 3 days. You can also use these plastic containers as an alternative to the other containers that I'm showing here. So you dosed your food, you've put your fish through the 30-day quarantine period. Now you just look at this decision tree here and see if any symptoms have popped up since. If no symptoms of disease or infection has popped up, you are ready to add your fish to the display tank. One option when introducing your fish to the display tank is to use a acclimation box like I'm showing here. This is a 6x8 box. You could also just opt to drop your fish into the tank. It's really up to the fish you have in your display tank. If you have some more active or some more aggressive fish, you might want to consider using one of these to just make the process of introducing your fish to your display tank's population a bit easier on them. And that's all there is to it. So here again is the full flowchart so you can see, and if you need to pause the video you can go ahead and pause this, or if you need a picture you can go ahead and take a picture through a screenshot. Just want to show this to you guys one more time to just overview the entire process and just get it to memory. So if you have any questions about this process, please feel free to leave a comment in the description. If you like content like this, I will be doing another part that will discuss the different saltwater diseases. So if you like what you see here, please feel free to subscribe and hit that notification button so you can be notified when additional videos come out. Thanks for listening and see you around.